Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, and today we're going to be discussing Warcraft. I'll just open up YouTube and Twitch because I don't know if I can see the chat from StreamYard, which is really annoying. But we want to be able to see you all. So here we go. If you're furiously typing, then just give me a minute and I'll see. And if not, well, silence means you approve. No one in the chat. 3 links. Yeah, here we are. Dan's just shown up. Now, we've been releasing over the course of a while now, of several months, I think. A series of Warcraft videos, all about the First Wars, which I'm not going to lie, this has been a real fun set of videos to make. Now, just to get it out there, Blizzard as a company is a company that's infamous for screwing everything up. And it's a little funny to see them fail to gaffe, make mistakes, as they find a way through incompetence, stupidity, and maliciousness to just shoot themselves in the foot and then start hacking away at their own foot. But I have seen some WoW tubers, because occasionally I like to listen to them, comment. Most of them just play the game, so they're game tubers and whatnot. I think it's only Bellular who actually do the whole lore thing, which, looking at the lore today of WoW, is just, it's a chaotic mess. But the idea of our Warcraft videos has always been to a bit of a learning thing, because I'm not going to lie, I find that I'm easily confused most of the time by the Warcraft lore, because you have the OG stuff that dates to, what was it? You have some of the original lore, which got retconned around and they kind of messed around with in recent years. And the original stuff was very different from what is currently canon, I guess. And this has to do with Medicine and the other writers, in some cases, correctly thinking, well, okay, we got to clarify stuff. We got to make it make sense. We have to kind of fix it. And Medicine himself is a massive comic book fan, so he's fond of retroactive continuity, something I'm not terribly fond of. I don't like the idea for the most part, because
I get that sometimes you find some order in chaos. For example, you might have 2 very good stories in the same world, but you have to make them match.
Okay, fair enough.
And often retcons are not truly well handled, but there are times where sometimes it is necessary to make things smoothly.
Yeah, make things run smoothly. Yeah, I'll just fix the camera. Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, I do understand that. I just find that more often than not, it just brings more chaos and it's just a larger mess. But with Warcraft, the original stuff I found was probably in some ways better, but in some ways the new stuff, like when I say new stuff, I mean like the retcons do make sense in some cases. And this is coming from someone who actually thinks retcons are a bad thing. And I find that, for example, the Marvel retcons are the bane of my existence, or were the bane of my existence, going back quite a few years. And when you consider that they had their Secret Wars reboot, they had all these different reboots in the 90s, early 2000s, and it just, and then of course they did all these retcons. It got to be a bit overwhelming because you don't know what's in continuity and what isn't, especially with Spider-Man. But with Warcraft, they ended up like for the most part, the first wars have remained mostly untouched, although arguably, I I'd say that Durotan has been the most retconned character, him and Medivh. Now, Warcraft 3 itself comes with a slight soft retcon to Medivh, but one can be explained away if you don't want a heroic Medivh. And by that I mean that the thing about Medivh is that in the original lore from Warcraft 1, he was just a spiteful guy. He was spiteful. But I'd say that there's the more extreme Medivh is not a likable fellow. There's the Warcraft 3 where deep down he was a heroic guy, kind of possessed. Sort of. That's one way of reading it. And certainly more recent interpretations of the character have gone with that. But then you have a middle ground where he was good once, then turned vile, and he's kind of almost, he's more a tragic character in some ways. And I have to admit that I kind of like the fence straddling a little. And I only say that because while I prefer Medivh as a villain because it adds pathos to Warcraft and it adds a greater complexity, I find, and it fleshes out Khadgar's journey a lot more. And the story becomes more about Khadgar than Medivh, and that's how it should be. Khadgar may be the son, like the kind of adoptive son of sorts, or the apprentice, but the story should be about him, not the master. And the reason I say that is that archetypally, the father, the mentor, is supposed to recede while the hero or the younger generation steps forward. And this is kind of how it's supposed to be. And in this regard, you look at Star Wars from episode 1 to episode 6, for example, just with some of the conflict between Anakin and Obi-Wan lies in that Obi-Wan's not willing to back away and recede and let his son kind of grow. And because Anakin doesn't fully need Obi-Wan at one point, but Obi-Wan keeps forcing things upon Anakin. That said, Anakin does not have the best judgment. So it's complicated. But with Luke, Obi-Wan truly recedes into the background. And it's Luke who steps forward. So this kind of bond between Ben and Luke is very, very important. In turn, though, by having Medivh be the focus of the Medivh-Khadgar relationship, you need to basically shunt Khadgar aside as a character. It's just, the idea is you can only have one. And I'd say Khadgar is the younger character. And as one of the protagonists of the original Warcraft era, he should be Medivh. That being said, I find that, on the other hand, having Medivh be a tragic figure, like in the movie, I actually kind of like his redemption scene. I prefer him unredeemed because it just adds to the fact that, like what he could have been. He could have been so great, and yet he didn't. And I kind of find that makes more sense to an extent, weirdly enough. That said, because it does add to a greater degree tragedy. But on the other hand, the movie where he's weeping and whatnot and hardly able to meet Khadgar's gaze as Khadgar stares at him as he's dying is a truly, truly great scene. It's a really tragic one. And I find that it's a scene that honestly does not get the credit it deserves, because it is a truly moving scene. And I don't know, I think that's something that Blizzard didn't get enough praise for. in that while the movie certainly had flaws, it wasn't a terrible movie. It was mediocre, but it was setting up for a Warcraft 2 Tides of War, I think it is, or Tides of Darkness. And the important thing there is that it was just setting up for a sequel. And a part of me resents the fact that Marvel used like 5 movies to do that, and they kept, getting the go ahead. While Warcraft, honestly, was not such a bad movie, and they were just setting up for one more movie, and yet, it has to get canned. The only problem I had with the main real visual problem I had with Warcraft, now that I think about it, is Doomhammer. He didn't have his armor. He was basically in boxers and briefs,
and he wasn't as present or prevalent.
But that comes with the other retcon. This is where we get into the bad retcons. Doomhammer. Now, the problem is Durotan has been pushed forward by Metzen and Blizzard because Metzen voices Thrall. And of course, I hope nobody hits the unsub button too quickly, but Thrall is a bit of a Gary Stu. Let's just be honest. He's Metzen's self-insert, in a way, on the Horde side. And I only say that because I don't know how else to describe him other than Green Moses. And the thing is, Thrall does have his compelling moments. He can be a compelling character. The only thing is that Durotan has likewise been pushed forward. When Durotan, this might sound weird. It's okay to have a side character who is the father of a great man, who's the best friend of a great man, but isn't great himself. Who's just a kind of background character, I guess you could say. Because if you look at, let's look at Dragon Ball, for example. It's a good example, I think. You have Roshi, who's a very great man and a very important character. I'm looking at the original Dragon Ball. And as well as the character journeys and whatnot, because we like we like Dragon Ball. We like Dragon Ball Z up to the Cell games. It's a great era of anime. But although we haven't watched in, 2-3 years? I can't remember. No, it was 2 years ago. But you have Son Goku, who's great. And you have the Ox King, who's also very great and important. These are all 3 very important characters. Ox King for being Goku's father-in-law and a bit of a father figure. Roshi for being a grandfather figure and a major mentor to Goku. And the thing is, Ox King is the only one who can rein in child Goku's energy because Goku truly reveres and respects him like a dad. And even when Roshi can't, Ox King always can. But you see, these 3 characters are very important, and they're all tied in together. Then you got Son Gohan, Goku's adoptive dad. Utterly irrelevant. He's just a background character. He's just there to die. And that's okay as a writer. Son Gohan, the first, is meant to be that character. I say the first because, his adoptive grandson is also Gohan. But it's okay for a character to be unimportant. And I find that Durotan is pushed forward in the movie and in recent interpretations of the original era at the expense of Doomhammer, simply because Thrall's there. And surely Thrall must have a very legendary, significant father. I mean, Goku had Bardock, but Bardock is kind of in some ways insignificant. He's a great character, but Bardock is there just to die and father Goku.
He embodies more the Saiyan spirit of the past. That's about to be extinguished.
With good reason, because the Saiyans are monsters.
Yeah.
But Bardock was redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very touching story. I mean, you can have a short story or a graphic novel about Durotan, but to push him and try to diminish Doomhammer the way they did, that I don't agree with, because Doomhammer is, how do I put it, a bit of the Horde Conan the Barbarian. He's an orc Conan. And he is someone who, he's known for his big hammer, for his big armor, But he's also such a macho, kingly figure that it's hard not to be overwhelmed by his presence when you go to the original era of Warcraft and Warcraft 2. He's pretty much he casts a shadow. He's the guy who, in the original lore, was able to single-handedly, easily take down Blackhand. But then when you go into the retcon, the Iron Horde, he's basically easily killed off by Blackhand, dismissively. Which, this is just ruining the character. But that said, Doomhammer is a great character. He's truly a phenomenal character. Well, he's my favorite character in Warcraft, just to be honest. Him or Arthas.
It is fine to build up a character like Duratan to the point where you can bond with him. But when you move him aside and you kill him in favor of Doomhammer, it makes the emotional impact far stronger, and you want Doomhammer to avenge Duratan.
Yeah, that was the whole idea, I think, of Duratan's story initially. But here's the amazing thing. The idea is that Doomhammer is akin to one of those incredible historic figures, such as Cao Cao or Caesar, or even Augustus, who could bide his time and bite his tongue for years on end. That is an incredible quality. That's not a quality we all have. I don't think I have it. But you are able to bide your time, slowly, like kind of wait your turn and build up towards having your revenge or bring someone to justice without ever giving any hint that you're going to backstab. Let's see. Good evening. Good evening. Hello, Mark Scheiber. Always. I probably butchered your surname again. How are you? Hope all's well. Glad to see you. We were just discussing Warcraft and how Doomhammer is integral to the lore because he's a political genius. And let's bear in mind, he does kill... he kills a lot of important characters. He kills Gul'dan, Blackhand, and Anduin Lothar. And the thing about Gul'dan and Lothar is they are not schmucks. Blackhand in the original lore seems to have been a bit of a schmuck. He was kind of scrawny in some images I saw of the original era. And if you notice, Doomhammer almost looms over him by a foot. Like, the thing is, Blackhand's not originally a very daunting orc. He's more cruel and dumb. He's more like Dong Zhuo from Chinese history. While Doomhammer is this great big mass of muscle. That said, that's not why we originally wanted to do this stream because, well, we figured it was about time we do a Warcraft stream because, well, we haven't done one because, well, the thing is, to be quite honest, we're fairly lacking in some confidence on our knowledge of some of the lore because Warcraft, as said, it has had some retcons, which makes looking into things a little tricky. That said, it is still a vibrant, very interesting world. And as I said, I've seen a YouTuber whom I actually like his channel. He said that for him, a lot of the characters have been ruined by a lot of the stupidity of Blizzard. And I get that, but I also think that maybe it's simply, I like to go back to the original era. And I'm trying to learn more about it. And we're basically reading about it and then presenting on it and discussing it in our Chronicles of the First Wars playlist, which is a great deal of fun to make because, as said, I don't know as much as others on Warcraft. I'll freely admit, I think you're in the same boat.
I'm essentially fresh jumping in.
Yeah, I'm I've not touched it in years, and even then I found it perplexing and hard to follow. Because you have some comics that have been retconned out, apparently for some weird portrayals of certain characters. You've got all sorts of retcons that have been chucked in. Garona apparently was revived, and her death was retconned out when her death was key to the story. You have things like that, which I don't understand. On the other hand, Doomhammer has been retconned out as a big, massive muscle, and as built orc, just as well. Oh, I have played Warcraft 3 and read The Dark Portal, both a long time ago, and I read the comics about Varian Rin's backstory also long ago. Yeah. I read about the comics of Varian Rin. I haven't really read them. I wish I had. We're fairly fresh, I think, as Dan said, to Warcraft. The Dark Portal, I'm familiar with the book, but I'm also not, in a way. Like I think I read passages, but I don't remember anything. And I have played Warcraft 3. We played it with some family friends into the ground years ago in the multiplayer mode. But as for the story, I have to admit I have played Warcraft 3 story into the ground a little. I love the story. Warcraft 3 and Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne have great stories. That's the high point of the story for Warcraft. I just think that Arthas is probably the best part of that game and the expansion. But sorry, it's just tired. I didn't get much sleep last night. But the original wars are not something that you would say. The thing is, this is something that I won't say is a retcon, but it's something that Blizzard, I will praise because this is over the course of several decades. It's that Blizzard built up the lore around the orcs slowly. They kind of did retcon out bad orcs. The orcs are all bad and irredeemable. And then, like in Warcraft 1, orcs versus humans, you don't get a sense that the orcs are very, very redeemable. But then when you get into Warcraft 2, you start to see more layers to them. Then you have the comics and the novels that come later that expand a little more. And I think that the important thing with the orcs is that them coming from another world was always part of the lore, but their nature is retconned out. And it's important because it signifies that we basically go from a story of, yes, good versus evil, but there's nefarious forces on both sides, and there's good forces within each side. And when you consider Doomhammer as a gray figure, this kind of adds further complexity there. Now, I'll make a weird argument. Warcraft could never have competed with Lord of the Rings or Hour of the Dragon for complexity. But that was never the goal, I think. It was never to make mythology, but fantasy. And in terms of fantasy fiction, orcs had never, or ogres or whatever, had never really progressed as a species. And this is something that Blizzard was taking. Metzen was really the genius here, I think, from what I've heard. He looked at this and said, what if we spin it on its head a little, and we turn things around a little and make our orcs different, because otherwise we just fall into the usual tropes, which I do think tropes are a good thing. They're guidelines. But there are times when you take a single risk and it pays off. And the orcs are representative in Warcraft of barbarians. That's basically what they are. And flinging them into the midst of Azeroth is important, and it changes things. as said, because if they were just another D&D ripoff or something, or it would get a little dull. On the other hand, the orcs still being semi in the wrong is important because they are. Let's just be honest. And in that regard, I think that you look at the moblins of Zelda, it's important that they be evil, because that within the context of the Zelda mythos, the story centers around Link and Zelda, almost invariably in every game. Of course, you get some games where, for example, Midna is more the main character in Twilight Princess, which is fine. But it's important that you kind of see Link and Zelda as the heroic characters, and there is the capacity for complexity within that kind of context and that kind of story. But here's the thing about Warcraft. Although it spun it on its head with the orcs, they did not, how do I put it, undermine the hero's journey, because the characters are still on hero's journeys. It's more like they took the Tranoshans of Star Wars, for example, and turned them into both heroic and villainous. They added a layer to it. And they're kind of pre-Shrek in that regard. This is not to say that an important part of, like in every genre, you get a point, like they eventually reach a point where they deconstruct and implode in on themselves. And then they have to rebuild, where you get, for example, the Western, people always go to that example, but it's a good one. With fantasy, I would say that arguably it was doing that in the early 90s. Warcraft kind of revitalized the genre in some ways and restored it a little. But, and you look at the Dark Portal and whatnot, you got two different dimensions. And so you have orcs who are not native to Azeroth invading Azeroth. Now, this is borrowing, obviously, to an extent from Tolkien, with how orcs are not native to Middle-earth, but they're introduced into it. But what Warcraft does differently is that there is no Sauron controlling the orcs like robots. It's, the orcs acting as individual independent agents. And while, yes, the orcs are able to an extent in Middle-earth, they are still in some ways bound to the Dark Lords. And this is an integral part, I think, of the differentiation. I don't know. Weirdly, I tend to... I don't want all fantasy to be exactly like Lord of the Rings. I want some similarities. I think the battle of good versus evil is important, but you do need some differentiations, because otherwise, each world, each franchise should be unique, should be special, and they each need their differences from each other. But in that regard, Warcraft is certainly very unique. That being said, the original era starts with a bang, with Gul'dan seemingly opening the portal, I should say, and leading a vast number of the Horde through it to invade Azeroth. Now, this is where the place they arrive in is the kingdom of Stormwind. Now, Stormwind has stood for centuries, and it has remained unchallenged within its immediate area, although more and more it's drifted under the influence of Lordaeron, the strongest kingdom around. The thing, though, for Stormwind is that they've pursued a more and more isolationist policy as time is going on. And there's some kingdoms that don't take this too well, but you know what? Azeroth's prerogative is towards Stormwind's prerogative is towards Stormwind. This is just common sense. But it is undeniable that in the century leading up to the First Wars, Stormwind is in a bit of a decline. They're struggling, and I only say they're in a bit of a decline is because they have had several attacks on their capital city, notably by gnolls and trolls. Not the internet kind of trolls, but trolls. But this has now each time Stormwind has pushed them all away. They succeeded against the gnolls under the leadership of King Baradan, who is honestly a remarkable king, probably the best of Stormwind's history, who was a war king par excellence. And you just look up in universe like how they seem to regard him. He seems to have been the be all end all. But he was also, I think, the third Rin king. So the Rin dynasty is pretty new to Stormwind. And weirdly, it's presiding over the decline of the kingdom. They're pursuing increasingly isolationist policies, but this is not to the benefit of Stormwind. This is to the detriment of the kingdom, weirdly enough. Normally, when a nation focuses on internal affairs and on trying to get its internal structure to prosper and consolidate what it has, this is usually a pretty good period to be in for the most part. Not always. Ultimately, eventually, it leads to decline, no matter what. But the thing is, arguably, Stormwind is in this latter period, only because you keep getting attacks on the capital. That's my argument. The name alone, not a band, a clan, a group. No, it's the Horde. The Horde that has, I don't know, oomph. Yeah, it certainly does have oomph. That reminds me, what I found funny was, now, when we did the poll for whether we should do this stream, I decided we have duh, nope, and for the Alliance, for the Horde. There's two latter options. And on Twitter, I only did the duh and nope, and duh won by a lot of votes. So putting them together and taking for the Alliance and for the Horde to mean, yay on the stream, we decided to do that. Not to mention the stream is also to celebrate us getting into the partnership program. So yeah. We just need to finalize some minor documents with YouTube and Google, and we could actually start making money off ads, which will be great.
For Stormwind isolating, it was probably a good time for them to isolate to try and work on itself, considering everything that's going on. But you do need to
but like it's led to 2 attacks on the capital.
That's fair.
But your argument is, regardless, Baradan was such a great king, it doesn't matter?
Well, you want to seem strong, for example, to the elves or the dwarves. If they constantly come into...
well, they're not invading. They never...
I know. To solve your problems and whatnot, it makes you look weak and too dependent on your neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
So, figuring out how things work, if they need a new system and whatnot.
Okay.
But you need to clean up your room before...
yeah, I know. But
it blows up in Stormwind's face.
Yeah, like, I'd argue Baradan kind of temporarily froze the decay, but then at the end of his reign, it blows up in grand style. My argument is just that we're looking at a kingdom that has it doesn't have any further expansion it can really do. Well, it's expanding into the lands of the trolls, arguably, but it's struggling to do that. And arguably, because it's being halted in its expansion, because you have several ages that every nation goes through, age of conquest is one. And when that grinds to a halt, you have an age of consolidation that inevitably follows, then an age of intellectualism. And I forget what the next age is theorized to be. Then you get an age of decay, in which you are colonized. Now, age of conquest is also an age of colonialism. Arguably, to an extent, Lordaeron is in the midst of a colonial period because it's basically exporting its culture and its mores to every country around it. Arguably, Lordaeron est beaucoup comme the United States to an extent, exporting its positive and negative attributes to everyone. And they have to go along with it. Otherwise, they face the Lordaeronian military, and nobody wants that. And that's ultimately, you look at the real world, that's what most of the, like, I'm not anti-American, no. I actually really like the US. But arguably, can its allied nations really say no to any of its policies? Not really. But I'm not political. I'm just saying they really can't. But on the other hand, there are times when it's a good thing, like when America is actually looking out for everyone's best interest. Other times when not really. And it's something that's on a case-by-case basis. With Lordaeron, it's much the same type of relationship. And Stormwind is kind of trying to break free from it, but I would argue that it was probably already in a consolidation period at the start of the Rin Dynasty, but that it's leaving the period of consolidation. It's bypassed the era of intellectualism and it's at decay. But I'm not saying that to bash Stormwind, but I'd say that I'm going to argue that in a way the process, in my opinion, can be reversed. And it's something that historically has been reversed. Because when you look at historically, what's a good nation? France, a nation we're both attached to. France was founded in a period of colonialism and conquest under Clovis, then under consolidation and decay and whatnot, then reorganized under the Carolingians, entered into a period of rapid expansion, look at Charlemagne, then fell into decay, and then reorganized under the Robertien and Capetien dynasty. Well, that's the same dynasty, just rebranded later, but they founded France to an extent, or refounded the nation, I should say. And then you had a period of slow recuperation from the decay of the Carolingians. Then you have a period of decay again under the 100 Years' War. Well, no, you'd had rapid expansion under Philippe Auguste, then intellectualism, then decay under Philippe le Bel's sons. And then you've got like 100 years of just collapse and other nations colonizing. Then you get France colonizing others under Louis XI, Laigny, and all the way up to the Wars of Religion. Then that's obviously you have a slow period of decay, really, after Louis XII, under Francois le Premier, who was a good monarch, but his reign was more an intellectual period, but it was slowly decaying. Then you have, Louis XIII, who has a massive colonial era, same to an extent with Louis XIV, but it also leads to intellectualism and decay and overspending. And then you've got 100 years of just total collapse. Then the next 100 years is a period of golden age and expansion and colonialism. And then you have decay and collapse right around the time of World War I and II. Then you have a great period of expansion again under Charles de Gaulle, and then back to decay. And now it could probably go either way. But it's something that I'd say that the Rin Dynasty presided over the decline, but if you look at the period of Warcraft 3 and even WoW, arguably Varian is presiding over a restoration of the fortunes of Stormwind. So it also doesn't help. Well, it actually helps Stormwind immensely that with the fall of Lordaeron and the elves, there's no one else to lead. And Varian is a brilliant character. Just he's very fortunate he doesn't have any competitors because he does not. He is brilliant, but let's be honest, Arthas is far more brilliant. But Arthas is out of the picture, so that leaves the way clear for Varian. And Varian is wise to pursue that policy. But the thing is, at the time of his father's no weakling for the most part. Well, he is, but he isn't. Like, Lane is a softer king. He's more a priestly king. I like to compare him a little to Saint Louis in some ways. Saint Louis was a pretty strong monarch. Just not perfect. Not a great warrior. Actually, a terrible warrior. But a really, really good cultural and intellectual monarch. Lane might be that kind of king in some ways. He seems like, when you look at portrayals of him in the comics and in the movie, he seems like a pretty chill guy, but he also seems like a pretty sharp man. Like I think he just feels an inferiority to his dad in the movie, at least. That he's a little indecisive at times and unsure of himself and relies on Anduin Lothar because a part of him is unsure of himself. On the other hand, he's very obviously a good king. Like I say he's very obviously a good king because I see I don't see too much to complain about or criticize.
He wants to make Stormwind work. And
one might almost say, I hope people don't mind the joke. He wants to make Stormwind great again. Just like his dad before him. I'm joking.
The Rin dynasty inherited a mess.
Maybe it might have.
But here it is. Lane wants to make sure that Stormwind can prosper. And he might have been able to do it, but then the orcs came.
Yeah, the orcs kind of I'd argue that he's not. Stormwind is in a bit of decline, but with Medivh kind of protecting the kingdom, arguably Stormwind is in a position that no one's going to mess with them. Not even the trolls, because they were butchered last time. But in some ways, Lane's kingship relies entirely upon Medivh. Without Medivh, he would not be king anymore because he's just not strong to an extent. But at the same time, he's not weak. He's just mediocre. And it's interesting that of all the Rin kings, I have to admit, on a personal level, Lane would probably be my favorite. He just seems like a really, well, sort of. He's probably my second favorite, actually. Sort of. He just seems like he's, the kind of guy that you could just, you'd hang out with. And that he's not skinny, but he's buff enough, but he seems more like the kind of king who'd be making like clay models or painting something and spending time going fishing with his kids. That's the kind of guy he seems. And I don't know, I kind of like that. Whereas, reminds me of Fingon. Yeah, I think there was inspiration taken from Fingon because Fingon is not a leader. He's a follower by his very nature. Fingon follows Maethros everywhere. But Fingon is no spineless weakling by any means. Oh my gosh, no. Dude's nuts. He's crazy brave. And yet, everyone knows he's not really the High King. It's Maethros. The same kind of relationship exists between Medivh, Anduin Lothar, and Lane. Everyone knows Anduin Lothar is the one who's really the muscle. Like, he's really the guy kind of running Lane. Like, ruling over things with Lane. On the other hand, who's the one ensuring the kingship? Medivh. But on the other hand, I think that Lane's the type of king that his personal staff really like him. Like, they like him. Maybe even love him because he's just, what's there not to like?
He may have an ideal vision for Stormwind, but he needs people to help him achieve that. And
now, he also, Oh. And he thinks, and he stands in the shadow of his father. Yes. And from a later perspective, his son. Yeah, I still maintain Orodreth, dad of Gil-galad. I'm just teasing there. I'm gonna die on that hill. I just know I will. But on the other hand, looking at, if you prefer, Fingon as father of Gil-galad, certainly Fingon stands in the shadow of his father and son. And yet there's something fascinating about Fingon himself, I would argue. And Fingolfin, there's no one greater than him in some ways. Arguably, he's greater than Feanor, because there's an air of nobility and regality about Fingolfin that Feanor didn't even have. Lane is son of the greatest warrior king of the Rin dynasty up until Varian, but father to the greatest king of Stormwind. Of course he's in the shadow, but this does not mean that he goes down without putting up a fight, or that he ruled poorly. No, he ruled pretty well. And you know what? Given that in some ways he was a puppet, in some ways he's a figurehead. Let's just be honest. Let's call a spade a spade. He, in some ways, relied too much upon Lothar and Medivh. But if you actually think about it, he could not have chosen better advisors and counselors. He lacked the strength and the drive to get up in the morning and be a successful, great king. He lacked the strength and drive. So what did he do? He surrounded himself with people who had the strength and drive, which, sure, but he did not play favorites at court in such a way that destabilized the court. He discouraged factionalism, but he directed his court with very clear precision towards peace and security and stability within the realm, and generally pulled back from meddling too much in Stormwind. You got to bear in mind, it takes weeks for Stormwind to catch wind of the Horde invasion. Now, news does travel slower in medieval times, but on the other hand, there's a lack of interference around the boundaries of the kingdom, so that I can't help but think that it might be the fault of the barons and counts for not reporting this. And on the other hand, he seems more a laissez-faire king who's more like, okay, we have troll problems. That's what I'm focused on. And let's try to secure trade and trying to secure internal stability. Let's not meddle too much in the lives of my people. So Lane is a king who's taking a grander view, but also trying not to give himself more paperwork, more work to do. There's a lot to be said about his kingship. And I will die on my hill, so let this shouting match continue. Yeah, certainly. But there's a reason why I said there's merit to the argument, and I actually think that to an extent, the Fingolfin Gil-galad relationship is the perfect comparison to the Beridan, Lane, and Varian relationships. That said, I remember reading up somewhere, I forget where, but apparently, I forget which interpretation, but I remember reading up somewhere that, and this popped up in our last Warcraft video, the one from the other day, which I really liked that one. I love the Fall of the Kings plot point. Dan knows I gush over it too much. But apparently Lane and Lothar both fancied Garona. And wow, like what does that mean for, like, she might have been maîtresse en titre, seeing Lothar or something, but, and then you have Gadgar. Like, this is a love square, isn't it? Or is it a love, like, how does it work in English? I don't know. I think that the movie did a decent job portraying the relationship between those three. Just because Medivh is the magic dude and Anduin the warrior. Does diminish Lane, at least I didn't see it that way. Okay, it doesn't diminish Lane. I think to an extent, but to put it in context, in regards to the nobility, Lane's in danger of diminishing himself. And looking at it from a historian's point of view, what Lane is doing is akin in a way to Henri Le Premier, to an extent, who had his really powerful archbishops of Canterbury. He did. This was a problem that later arose in Henri II's reign, his grandson's reign, wherein Thomas Becket came along. But the idea is that Henri Le Premier relied on his archbishops of Canterbury to run clerical affairs and the bureaucracy. But in turn, he relied on David, his brother-in-law and heir presumptive to the throne of Scotland, to keep the borders in check, and as a bit of a younger warrior that he could always call upon because he was his premier nobleman. And it's that kind of relationship, I think. But Lane balances this all out fairly well, but never fails, I think, to give a mission to the nobility. But on the other hand, there are nobles who betray Stormwind to the Horde, I believe. So that brings into question just how loyal some of the nobility were. And Anduin Lothar is not a highborn guy, so obviously there must have been some resentment there. Because for his sister to become queen, that's jumping up someone from gentryman to upper class a little too quick. Let's see. That is not. No, I forgot the not. Yeah. But that said, on the Horde end, we see a perversion of the relationship between Blackhand, Gul'dan, and even, like, if you look at Blackhand as Lane, or a shadow to Lane, Gul'dan as a shadow to Medivh, and Doomhammer, I don't know, as a counter to Lothar, you have a very twisted version of those relationships. Just saying. And on the Horde end, this is the first time all the clans have been united. The clans are brought together, welded together, actually, I should say, through the cruelty and force of will of Gul'dan. Everyone knows he's really running the show. Now, Medivh, in some ways, is the power behind Lane, but he doesn't involve himself too much in affairs. So everyone knows Lane is really the king. Just if you mess with Lane, you mess with Medivh. With Blackhand, everyone knows if you mess with Blackhand, you mess with, well, Gul'dan. But they also know you mess with Doomhammer. But on the other hand, Doomhammer becomes a rallying figure against Blackhand and Gul'dan. But the difference is that Gul'dan is cruel and short-sighted. And while I'm going to propose that he obviously wanted to get the Horde across the portal for this burning legion, but I'd argue that the long-term planning had to have been Medivh. Medivh just seems to have more long-term strategic capabilities. And I'm not bashing Gul'dan there. It's just Gul'dan is very short-sighted. He's a glutton. Like, just to be honest, he is a very gluttonous guy with his fel and just wanting to devour all life that he can find and just wanting to empower himself. Whereas the weird thing is that, and I'll get to Medivh in a moment, and again, but the interesting thing about Gul'dan is that he puts a complete weakling on the throne of the Horde. I believe the Horde had been united a few times, but they were not terribly centralized. There was no real kingly figure. And you have, in essence, in Blackhand, a war chief who lacks the strength to rule on his own. But he realizes it. And he knows Gul'dan's the real war chief. But none of the clans would accept Gul'dan. They don't like him. They fear and hate him. But on the other hand, they don't much like Blackhand either. And they know Gul'dan is the real war chief. But what can they do? So you have Blackhand, who, whenever anyone questions his loyalty, or not his loyalty, but his rule, or question his right to rule, he kills them. The trouble is, his own daughter eventually decides, hey, Dad, you're not very good at this. Kill her. Oh.
Oops.
Yeah. But, like, he killed his own daughter and her lover. What in the heck? But on the other hand, Blackhand just seems to blunder into everything. Like, researching for the Chronicles of the First Wars, it's just a history. Like, in the lead up to the actual conflict, like, he face plants against the trolls. He face plants at every turn. It's just, in my opinion, if Blackhand had continued, if Blackhand was not killed, the Horde would have probably been just shunted aside and just, whatever. They'd have been easily taken care of. There was no way they could, even by force of numbers, they weren't going anywhere because Blackhand's incompetent. Now, I can't say that Gul'dan is completely incompetent, but I'd argue that Blackhand is messing up all of Gul'dan's work. And it's a matter of delegation. He's delegating to Blackhand, and Blackhand can't seem to do it right. But Doomhammer does. Now, it's weird, but I believe I read somewhere that Doomhammer ends up leading the raid to kill Blackhand's daughter. That he plays a crucial role in it. This is, in a way, what's weird is that this is a move against Blackhand. Blackhand has no other kids, from what I understand, as far as I've read. Like, and Blackhand doesn't even realize what Doomhammer just did. He just cut off Blackhand's lineage. Like, you know, in a fantasy or medieval sense, that's, even in the modern sense, that's clearly moving against you. He killed your daughter. You have no heirs. You have no children outside of her. She had no children. He just cut your lineage. And you're going to congratulate him and thank him? Like, wow. It's just, yeah. I just think Blackhand is a special kind of stupid and arrogant and evil. To kill his own child. Like, I know of a few cases in history where men have done that, and I just find it shocking and foolish. And it's something that is just, well, I've only seen one case where there was an argument for it, and that was in Korean history, but you had a guy who was behaving exactly like Caligula and Commodus, and he was heir to the Korean throne, and his dad saw it as, this man cannot succeed to the throne. And the thing is, his son began doing things like threatening his own kids, threatening his wife, and his father basically had to step in and go, okay, put him in a box. We just leave him there to die. We don't touch him because there's law. You can't stab or kill a Korean prince or a royal. And this was the only case I could find where an argument can be made. You have a nation that's about to collapse because Commodus is about to claim the throne. So the father did what Marcus Aurelius did not have the courage to do.
He was in a position that he had to consider the love of his son, love for his son, and his responsibilities as a ruler.
As well as a grandfather and father-in-law. That said, for this act of sacrifice and this tragedy, and a personal tragedy that destroyed Yangzhou, he was condemned in history. To an extent, justly so. To an extent, not so justly.
He was given a raw hand,
and he tried.
And even if you were to skip him through the succession,
it would have led to civil war.
What was he supposed to do?
Yeah. He had no other choice. That said, Blackhand has options, just doesn't care, and his daughter was actually competent. Like you read up about her and you go, no. Like if she I understand the orcs don't believe in like cognitive succession or like female succession in universe at this point, but even if like you left her to mother the heir or be regent, she'd do a good job. Like, yeah. My point is just that Blackhand's act is a savage one, but Doomhammer is clearly using it to become heir and position himself. He looks good. He looks competent. He cements his position as the guy who can get the job done, unlike Blackhand. But he also does this as a move against Blackhand politically. And I think all the orcs realize what Doomhammer did. So this is the best possible move for him. But what makes it worse is that Gul'dan doesn't even clue in that this is a move against him as well.
Gul'dan is an embodiment of evil.
Yeah.
The short-sightedness, it's all about him.
Yeah. But on the other hand, Gul'dan does have some tactical capability. He is smart. I'm just saying he's short-sighted. And you look at, well, evil usually is. And you look at, let's see. If you look at what happens next, Blackhand just, he does not do well in the war to follow. But after the daughter is killed, I think it's before then that he has Durotan killed. And clearly this peeved off Doomhammer, who ended up, I think, taking in a lot of the Frost Wolves, but many of the Frost Wolves were also dispersed by Blackhand. But he feared a rebellion, and by all accounts in the lore, Durotan was scheming against Gul'dan and Blackhand. He was scheming against them. I'd argue that traditionally Durotan was not the soft weakling he is in the movie, because he is massively weak. He does not have the backbone to rebel properly. This might sound weird, but in my opinion, Gul'dan did not need a Mak'gora. If he had just browbeaten, he could have browbeaten Durotan back in line. Even with the death of Durotan's wife, he could have browbeaten Durotan. Durotan does not have the willpower to fight. He's weak. And I know that's a harsh indictment, but the movie does not do a good job showcasing him as a really strong character. Now, the game and the novels do showcase a much stronger individual. But he's not formidable and brilliant and physically just overwhelming like Doomhammer. But he is smart, at least from what I can glean from the books and whatnot. I've not read a lot of them. I've only read about them for the most part and traced the general lore and whatnot. Durotan can discern that things are not looking good for the Horde, and that they are being used by Sargeras, the Burning Legion, and, well, I don't know if he knew about the Burning Legion itself. That will require more of a deep dive. But he certainly knows Gul'dan is some sort of tool for someone else, and that Gul'dan is using the Horde, and that it is not in the Horde's interest to continue to cooperate with Gul'dan. And there's the knowledge, I think, that they are many. Gul'dan is one. Why don't they just resist? And it's a matter that the Horde lack the willpower and the backbone. And this is what makes Doomhammer so formidable. He's, in his case, a bit of a great man of history to an extent. But Doomhammer does have some of the same arrogant features of Gul'dan and Blackhand. He does have an arrogance to him. But Durotan basically, I think, tries to organize a coup and coordinate to an extent with Stormwind, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or at least my non-enemy. And arguably, this is the sort of thing Doomhammer probably knew about, but probably didn't know how to handle. Only because, well, if it goes through, the Horde will be in chaos and will be undeniably destroyed. That's not good. On the other hand, Durotan's involved. But that said, if it succeeds, it gives Doomhammer the chance to seize the day, to unite the Horde under his leadership. And hey, it means no Gul'dan. So it's a tricky situation Doomhammer's in. But of course, it doesn't proceed very well. Durotan is killed. Doomhammer does not take it well. He's not impressed. That's his best mate. But he swallows his rage and hatred and his vengeance until the right moment. And you have, of course, Blackhand, meanwhile, who has tried several different assaults and just screwed it up and needed rescuing from the Secret Council, which the fact that this so-called Secret or Shadow Council has to keep bailing him out is just, what's the point of being secret if you have to keep bailing this moron out? Or imbecile, as dinosaurs would call it. Imbecile, that's a better word. But that said, you have Medivh, who soon goes. Well, it's at this point Khadgar finds out that Medivh opened the port on Azeroth's end, and that Medivh has been compromised. Now, what I like about the movie is that it showcases Khadgar's investigation, and it does it in a good way. I think that if it had been a TV series, though, we would have seen a lot more nuance to the investigation, and I think we would have seen a much better murder mystery in a way, or whodunit. And I think that Khadgar was the perfect character to do a whodunit with. And Khadgar is one of the best characters in Warcraft. But, okay. I thought I missed something in the chat. Nope. But as to Medivh's betrayal, that's something that, like we said, there's different degrees of interpretation. Take the one you like best. I'm not going to say much more because, in truth, this is the thing about literature. You can have and should have certain things in the lore which are consistent. I mean, for example, we all know Fëanor was wrong. I know there's that old meme about Fëanor did nothing wrong. No. Let's be honest. He did. He did almost everything wrong. But if you look at, for example, that you can debate and discuss, but like I said, it's the practical actions of what did happen. No one can debate. What did happen, no one debates or questions. It's the why and some of the looser details. Now, on the other hand, when you have when it comes to every story, there's always an issue of narration, so that you can question some of what happened to an extent. Now, I know I sound like I'm contradicting on myself. I am to an extent. But if you look at Lord of the Rings, why is it that the events of Lord of the Rings happen? Well, it's a story told from the point of view of the hobbits, and they're recounting the story after the fact. the facts have already long since happened in universe. They're just recounting it and adding to the Red Book of Westmarch that was put together by Bilbo Baggins, originally by Bilbo Baggins. But you look at the Hyborian Age; it's really the Nemedian. Can't talk. English. The Nemedian Chronicles. They are the chronicles of Conan's life. You look at Dragonlance. It's Ostinus writing it all down. Some of it by hearsay. And some stories like the Legends trilogy is really Caramon Magir copying it down for Ostinus alongside Chrysania. Warcraft is unusual. It's happening in real time. You don't like the issue of the unreliable narrator. You can't, like in the books, you can kind of do that. I mean, like the events of what happens to Arthas, you can kind of question a little because Arthas can be a little unreliable at times, and like it's up for interpretation to a limited extent. But like the events of Warcraft 1, are they in doubt? Really? Not really, because they happen in real time in universe. For example, we know that Doomhammer completely demolishes Blackhand in the Mak'gora. That's not up for debate. Now, of course, they try to play around with the continuity a little, but for the most part, it's not up for debate. It's a fact. Doomhammer won. Doomhammer took him down. Why did Doomhammer do it? Well, that you can debate. So when it comes to stories with peculiarities or in the narrative or frame narratives, or that are first person in some capacity, when I say in some capacity, I mean like Joseph Conrad to an extent. Some of his stories are not told from first person, they're from third person. But you're supposed to question the characters because they're not reliable narrators. And this is part of the nature of novels. Novelists have a tendency of playing around with the narrative and the narrator. And I've noticed that in Dragonlance. I've noticed that to an extent with Tolkien and Howard. But on the other hand, when you look at Warcraft, can you really question? Okay, you can question what Durotan's motive was for leaving the main group of the Horde. We're not sure. There, I'd argue, given that we have different versions of the story, you can choose what you prefer. Same with Medivh's motivation. And arguably in Warcraft 3, when he's going around going, the end is nigh, sail across the ocean with your kingdom. That seems crazy. The way he behaves seems a little nutty. I wouldn't listen to him. I'm just saying, I'm being honest. I would not listen to that guy. I'd be like, okay, Grandpa, go lay down. It's okay, Grandpa. But the other factor is, how do I put it? He is giving a valid warning, but here's the thing. He has access to magic. He can disguise himself as an oracle or as whomever, but instead he chooses the shape that is his own, that of Medivh the Great Traitor, who betrayed all of Azeroth to the Burning Legion in Gul'dan. Yeah, that'll go down great.
He could easily disguise himself as a new identity to advise, to repent for his choices, but he chooses his own form.
Well, even if he can't change forms, he can cast illusions. So, yeah, heck, why didn't he try to... Like, it's just such a bizarre choice to go in his own shape and whatnot. In that regard, I question his motivation. Was he trying to convince Lordaeron, or was he trying to not convince Lordaeron? That's where I think it's up for interpretation. And Medivh is such a character that his motivation should continuously be questioned as a character. And if he was... Now, I like the idea that he started off good and fell from grace. But that in that regard, he becomes more like Saruman. But at the end, I remember reading up somewhere that it was him who cursed Khadgar. But it actually isn't. Like in recent bits of the lore, it's obviously Sargeras who possesses Medivh. But you can go either way to a limited extent. How much was Medivh willing to comply with Sargeras? It's his whims. That said, depending on your variance of the evil of Medivh, you can make the argument that, how do I put it? In Warcraft 3, he is coming in not to convince people. He is coming in, well, okay, maybe he's coming in to convince Thrall, sure. But he's not trying to convince Lordaeron. He might be trying to screw over Lordaeron. Or if he is trying, if you go over more, he is truly repentant, he's doing a really dumb job about it. Which, the trouble is, Medivh is many things, but not dumb. Which brings his methodology into a great deal of question. And it just makes the entire situation very bizarre for him. That said, if you disagree, that's fine. But when you look at Khadgar and Garona going to deal with him, yeah. And it's interesting that originally it was Garona with Khadgar, not Anduin Lothar. And while I do like how in the movie Lothar begs and begs and begs, I kind of prefer that it was Garona. And how cool would it have been if at the end of the movie, okay, this falls into the stupid Durotan problem. And it's this. Durotan probably should have died halfway through the movie. And then you just have Doomhammer unquestionably following. Now, what that would do is have Doomhammer. The climax of the movie would be that Stormwind's forces are pushed back and they have to fall back behind the city walls and they're besieged. On the Alliance head end, Lane is slain after Medivh. On the Horde end, Gul'dan is cast into a coma and Doomhammer crushes Blackhand's skull. And I kind of think that would be a better ending to the film, and a much more, like, what's funny is that I think that had they stuck with the original story, it would be much more cinematic than what they did do. But that's my personal opinion. That said, Blackhand was, I believe, throwing everything he had against Stormwind when you pretty much had Gul'dan just falling into a coma. Gul'dan accesses the mind of Garona, and from there tries to access the mind of Medivh, as Medivh is being beaten back by Khadgar. Khadgar then defeats and kills Medivh, and you have the Fel, which just tear a huge, causes so much trouble. And you have, of course, Gul'dan cast into that coma, as mentioned. And if he really wanted to repent, doing that in disguise, again, manipulating people, just is not the right way either. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But it's just nobody trusts or likes him. This is where maybe he should have convinced one person the king trusted and sent him off to convince the king. Weirdly, the person... Okay. Weirdly, the person to convince might be Arthas to an extent. But the problem is, Uther would not have listened to Arthas or tolerated him pushing to leave the continent. Uther had a stranglehold on power at that point, so he's not going to let it go. Arthas, on the other hand, would he listen? No, maybe with enough insight. Actually, it might be a case of convincing Jaina. It's convincing someone by 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You convince Jaina to convince Uther or Arthas, and then you get them to convince the king. Well, I think that might be the way to go. Jaina probably would listen. She never had a problem with listening to bad advice or the wrong people, but in this case, this is good advice, and probably the wrong person to an extent. So he just have to convince her to convince Arthas, who'd probably be reluctant, but Arthas was always amenable to listening to Jaina. Same with Uther to an extent. And then the king would, of course, listen to either Arthas or Uther. So maybe manipulation is not quite the right way. But if you're going to be honest about it, maybe the best, which is probably the best route, might be Jaina. That might be best. It's either that or using the last of your power to open up the portal. A bit, at least a small portal for Khadgar, and Khadgar could do all the convincing. But that's not. But the trouble is, for Khadgar to do that, I think that Medivh's ego couldn't handle it. And I just. Jaina did listen in the end. Oh, yeah. But wasn't she kind of shut down by the leader of the Kirin Tor during Warcraft 3? Yeah, she kind of was, to an extent. So, yeah, she can't convince him, but I'm just saying she could probably convince Arthas. Arthas certainly can convince his father. When Uther's not in the room. But the thing is, Medivh probably needed to get to the king through Arthas. And he can't have known that the king would not like seeing him. It's just something that I think that Medivh went about it the wrong way. And that the character to turn to was Jaina and Arthas. And this has to do with, at that point, Arthas was starting his way down his own dark path. I disagree. This was at the beginning of Warcraft 3. This was right before he started to follow around the scourge of the undead, that plague of undead. And even then, technically, Arthas's dark path only began after the massacre of Stratholme. Arguably, I'd say that it begins around that time, around Stratholme. Before that, he's not really on a dark path. And on the other hand, the sad thing for Arthas is that he was always destined to shed Lordoranian blood because he was a strong prince. He was a really good crown prince. And the problem with that is Uther didn't want that. Uther wants a puppet. Uther is a political guy. Like, he wants to rule through whoever's on the throne. And he's not going to stomach Arthas thinking for himself. So no matter what, it would have been civil war between him and Arthas, had Arthas continued on his political path. Let's say no undead scourge or plague or whatever. Arthas begins to step more into the role of crown prince. You have the Edward I, or Lord Edward at the time, versus Simon de Montfort. And Simon was at one point the muscle behind Henry III, and you just had Edward, who had to jockey with this other lord in order to keep the stability of England. And arguably, Arthas was going to be cast into that same position. And that said, because of Stratholme, Arthas is on a dark path because that haunts him. He questions his own choices. But Medivh came to Jaina the moment Arthas went to Stratholme. if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think he did, actually. So Medivh was just a moment too late. That's a fair point. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. So Medivh does try that, actually. So that doesn't cancel what I said, but it does show that he did realize, okay, the best way is for Jaina through Arthas, for like this indirect route, which arguably that shows that Medivh is genuinely freaking trying to save this kingdom. And now I'm going to praise Medivh there. That does show the redemption arc, arguably. My argument is he should have just gone for Jaina from the start. And it was, but on the other hand, you can kind of put it up for interpretation and whatnot. I'm just saying, you can go either way. And that's the beauty of the story, is that with Medivh, you can kind of go either way. I really like the darker side of the character to an extent, the darker interpretation. I just think that there's something fascinating to be found there. On the other hand, I do remember him trying to warn Jaina, but it was too late. He dilly-dallied for too long. And that, I think, is up for interpretation to an extent. But I'm not biased against Medivh. I actually like him as a character. I think he's interesting. But I'm just of the mindset, I bristle at just, Medivh was always good. No, Medivh was bad. At least in Warcraft 1. He started off good, became bad. Now it's possible he then tries to become good. So I just want there to be that open interpretation thing, because I think that it leaves it for the player or the reader. And the thing about video games is that if they are to stand on their own as literature, we need these kind of open for interpretation moments in the story. And the reason we need that is for them to be able to, because movies have that, books have that, short stories have that, plays have that, video games need that as well. And that's where, for example, my personal preference is he was too late, but I'm not sure. Some days I'm like, I kind of like the darker interpretation that he wasn't really trying. But on other days I'm like, I like the idea that he was, but he arrived too late. Like, I know that sounds like it's the faults with me. I guess it is. But I think that, like I said, we need that open interpretation. On the other hand, we need to be able to have debates about the morality of Arthas's actions regarding Stratholme, because, you know, it's a good debate to have. It's a great moral dilemma. And it's this sort of stuff that makes Warcraft 3 probably the height of the story. That said, Medivh's actions during the first set of wars, I don't think are really up for debate. He was in the wrong. But it's what happens after he dies. And so, yeah, you've got a really lovely redemption story for the most part, but it's just, there are times when it's just, what is he doing with Lordaeron? But that said, there is an argument to be made that he is trying, but the trying is not good enough. And that's the ultimate tragedy of it. That said, Arthas ended up, well, yeah, we all saw how badly that went down. Especially in the Frost Waste, when he gets that one sword. Yep, that did not go over well. But arguably, though, I think the most tragic characters with Medivh's death, though, are Khadgar and Garona. And to an extent, Varian. I'm going to argue Varian just because, you know, what happens in the aftermath. You have Garona, who's controlled, well, has that impulse to kill her allies, set in her by Gul'dan sometime before she was captured. So obviously she was basically a Trojan horse. And she then sets about murdering Lane in front of Varian. No way that's not going to go down badly. I mean, at best, he starts dressing up like a bat and starts beating people up on the streets of Stormwind. At worst, he becomes pretty bigoted against orcs. I'm joking there. Yeah, this is basically the Batman backstory. Except the difference is Joe Chill, at least in Batman Begins, has a much more interesting journey. Joe Chill is, he's tragic to the core in Batman Begins. But Garona, the great tragedy is she doesn't get much of a chance. She's possessed. She's forced to do this deed she doesn't want to do. Then she flees the city back to the Horde, because where else is she going to go? And rather than finding Gul'dan and Blackhand to take her in, she finds Doomhammer. And Doomhammer decides to torture her for information on the other Secret Council members, which he gets in order to slaughter them, or a great many of them. Torture is never right. So Doomhammer does something morally and ethically wrong on every level. On the other hand, here we do have the question, would she have revealed the information? And could she reveal the information? I mean, if she's got a weird spell on her to kill her friends, is there a spell on her to prevent her from willingly giving up such information?
That's a fair point.
But on the other hand, maybe she wouldn't give it up. What does she have left? Technically, she probably has Khadgar left, but she probably doesn't believe that. So, Garona is a pretty tragic character. Much as Medivh is to an extent, in Warcraft 3. Now, even I'm, with all my, not trolling, but like my view of open interpretation is going, for the most part, the best, or at least maybe not the best, but the most direct reading of the text of Warcraft, so to speak, is that Medivh does try his darndest, and it's a tragedy. But with Garona, she tried her best, and it just wasn't enough. And she pays the price. She is tortured to death by Doomhammer. On Doomhammer's end, he had lost his best friend. He had lost almost everything emotionally. He was rich and powerful now, but hey, it wasn't enough. He takes down Blackhand pretty handily. And this is where I really resent the Iron Horde stuff, like where they have Blackhand easily dispose of Doomhammer, or them making Doomhammer too frightened to defy Gul'dan and Blackhand openly. When no, he did have the colonies, he just had more brains than anything. And Doomhammer, seeing Gul'dan go coma, decides, okay, now's the time. Easily defeats Blackhand, takes command of the Horde, and storms the walls of Stormwind. So that Anduin Lothar has to charge in, rescue the royal children, and get the heck out of Dodge. Which leads to, well, Doomhammer claiming the city. So I ask you, now I'm going to ask Mark Scheiber, and I'm going to ask anyone else who watches the stream after the fact, does this make Doomhammer the Avenger of Lane as well, to an extent? And does this make him a legitimate king of Stormwind? Because technically he's claimed the city, he's claimed the crown, he's claimed everything. Does this make him a king of Stormwind, as well as war chief? I ask facetiously. Now I know this is probably not going to give me any brownie points because, like a lot of people are very attached to the Ren dynasty, which that's fine. But I just ask as a matter of maybe not trolling, but just curiosity of what people think. All right. Well, moment of silence, and silence means they agree wholeheartedly with me. Silence always means yes.
Maybe.
Always. Oh, king by conquest.
Ah.
Yeah. And I wonder if. Yeah. Now, had Blizzard and Medicine not turned on Doomhammer and decided, let's retcon out his muscle, his brains, and just generally shaft him as a character, I wonder if they might have made him a proper usurper to the crown of Stormwind. I think the problem is that it opens up a lot of. It would open up a point of conflict within World of Warcraft. Because not if. Doomhammer is such a macho figure, he's got to have at least like 3 to 8 kids running around. And I only say 3 to 8 because medieval period, fantasy. And I only say he's ultra macho because he's a guy who basically claims the crown of the Horde on the premise of, look at me, I'm the most manly man around. That guy's got to have kids running around. He's got to have sons just, trailing after daddy. But the problem with this is that it means that Thrall has competition and very enough competition. And I mean, no offense to Medicine, but he cannot stomach any kind of rival to Varian or Thrall in any way, except each other. And that's a point of criticism I have for the story, because competition story-wise in universe breeds drama. It breeds it's so bizarre to me, because in Warcraft 1, 2, and even to an extent 3, you have characters who compete with each other, and this drives. It's Warcraft. I mean, for heaven's sake, for a reason. You've got Thrall, and it's been so many years. I forget the guy he's competing with. That he ends up having to. He struggles with near the end of his campaign in the Horde, but this was another point I didn't. Thrall doesn't have much conflict in the Orc campaign of Warcraft 3. It's why everyone I know is basically skip over it or just blaze through it because there's no conflict. But on the human campaign, Arthas has Uther for competition. He's competing with Uther. They're politically jockeying with each other. They're constantly they're locking horns all the time. And this drives the narrative. In Warcraft 1, you have, even in the movie, Anduin Lothar is locking horns with Khadgar, and you have Medivh locking horns with Khadgar, and even to an extent Anduin Lothar. The human campaign's a mess. But then you have Anduin Lothar, who has to flee to Lordaeron. And it's at that point the human campaign gets much more united. And the Orc one, kind of, you see Doomhammer having to lock horns with some internal rivals on occasion. But this political and war jockeying signals, yes, a weak leader to an extent, but it also signifies, drama. So you have this internal conflict on both sides. I mean, the Alliance had the Medivh problem, who was possessed by Sargeras eventually, and was a traitor. He had opened the Dark Portal. That being said, he had redeemed himself post-mortem. So there was a part of him when he was dying that went, this portal business
wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, wasn't a good idea at the time. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but it wasn't. But then, okay, so that's the human side. Obviously, there's some drama. And you, of course, have the love drama with Garona, whatever. I have to bring that up. That's conflict. But then you have on the Horde end, Doomhammer, Blackhand, and Gul'dan all jockeying with each other. You have even Blackhand's daughter jockeying with her dad. That's drama. So both sides have this these internal kerfuffles. And then, of course, both sides don't really have as much kerfuffles in Warcraft 2 as they throw everything they've got at each other, and it's just so awesome, plot-wise. And then you have Warcraft 3, which is also awesome. But my point is, in World of Warcraft era, wouldn't it be more heck, even Warcraft 3 for the orcs, wouldn't it have been more interesting if one of the sons of Doomhammer had to compete with Thrall?
Yeah.
And even if you had another son of Doomhammer in World of Warcraft, instead of who's leading the Horde and I think the continent of Azeroth, and he's competing with Varian for the throne of Stormwind. Heck, you could even have him cast out of the Horde by Thrall, because Thrall's going, well, I'm the leader of the Horde now. I don't want no sons of Doomhammer challenging my claim. But that's the Horde in Kalimdor. What about the Horde in Azeroth? Not Kalimdor, but whatever. Like I said, it's been years. And I'm fairly noobish with Warcraft, and I think that's showing. But my point is, you could have a son of Doomhammer competing with Varian for the throne of Stormwind. This could be an interesting plot point, as you have nobles choosing either the orc pretender, or the human pretender. Or heck, if you really want to go pretty far, you could have at one point in one expansion maybe Varian cast from his throne, and the Doomhammer heir trying to, say, Alliance, how about me? You could do stuff like that. But ultimately, they shy away from that, which I think is a shame. But this is the sort of drama that makes original Warcraft era really fascinating, and makes Warcraft 3 the best of the series, because, the high point of the series, because it doesn't get more dramatic than what happens in Warcraft 3. But I understand if fans will disagree with me. That's fine. Disagree with me all the way. Love what you love. Don't listen to me if you don't like it. And I will be honest, I'm going to keep pumping out the content and remaining as unbiased as I can get, because people who pay attention to the chronicles of the First Wars aren't going in to hear, for example, me say, well, with Medivh, it's up for interpretation at times, or for me to showcase how rusty I am with some of the lore or of Warcraft 3, because it's been 3 years since I played it. They're there to hear, but I will replay the game because I have to once we get to the Warcraft 3 era. And I will have to go on a refresher for that. But I think that, for example, when we go to do readings of Warcraft novels, we're obviously going to have to read the text and give our views on it. But Chronicles of the First Wars as a playlist is meant to have, the actual facts, not opinions, not interpretations, just the straight up lore. And that's where I think, because it's us basically making our way through the lore as we're refamiliarizing or familiarizing for the first time with some bits of the lore that we've honestly never seen before. Mm-hmm. And you look at, and so don't worry, we're not going to taint that with, well, it's open for interpretation. Well, the first part of those videos is always like the actual facts. Then we end up going, we try to figure it out, and we go, okay, well, this is one interpretation, this is another. So for the most part, that playlist is going to remain pure and undistilled. And then we're going to later do the distilling. But I think that being said, Khadgar must be the probably the coolest mage in Warcraft history for having managed to essentially take down Medivh, Gul'dan, and even kind of take down Sargeras in a way, all in one blow. To which I'm just going to say, Medivh for president. Or, actually, maybe Medivh should have been elected leader of the Alliance just for the fact that he took down three of the most powerful forces of magic in one blow. I realized that it took him many blows to take down Medivh, but
Khadgar, he's the goat.
Yeah. Parce que quand le temps est venu, he, you have Gul'dan trying to infiltrate the spirit of Medivh. I wonder if that maybe had a role to play in Medivh's redemption, where this violation of his spirit kind of made him realize this guy's not my buddy. And then there's the question of why did Medivh actually side with the Horde to begin with? In the movie, you get the sense that he did it because he felt overshadowed by Khadgar. And it's implied he may have unrightfully claimed the position of Guardian, or in some capacity had become tainted after he claimed the position of Guardian. And he is the rightful Guardian. Make no mistake. It's just a movie is a little weird with some of the lore. But in the movie, he's obviously supposed to step down for Khadgar because Khadgar's his apprentice, and Khadgar is supposed to become the next Guardian, but he's not willing to. But on the other hand, he wants to prove he's a hero, so he sets up this false crisis so that he can be the hero of the hour. But then, he gets possessed by Sargeras partway through it because he's like, because Sargeras is going, no. We actually do want this thing to go through. We do want the Horde to take over. But on the other hand, he's tainted from birth because, his mom was touched by Sargeras when she was pregnant with Medivh. And so it's open for interpretation to an extent, but I think I like the most human answer, that he felt envious of Khadgar. He was jealous.
It's very natural.
But on the other hand, this jealousy led him to folly. And on the other hand, left him open to be, how do I put it? Corrupted by Gul'dan and Sargeras. It's kind of the man who has the devil on his shoulder and the devil is whispering into his ear and telling him, I can help you with that. I can help you because everybody will like you better. But I like the idea that he got driven down that path. He truly was on board. But then maybe, as he lays dying, he's starting to realize, what did I do? But I like the idea that he still feels jealous enough to curse Khadgar. He lobs it at Khadgar, but then he still gets, that happens before he's cursed. He's dying. So Khadgar is cursed before the battle, I believe. And then, that's what happens. Then Khadgar somehow still manages to beat him down. And I think that what I like about the movie is that it proposes that Khadgar still had it in him to be compassionate and sympathetic to Medivh. So you have Khadgar. I wonder if maybe, I haven't read any of the books that detail that part of the journey. I wonder if Khadgar still had compassion. He got cursed into an old man's body. He's lost the years of his life. They were stripped from him, and he still showed compassion towards Medivh. Maybe it's in that moment that Medivh went, I cursed you. And you still have it in you to love me? Wow. And then you have Gul'dan going, Gimme, it's mine! My knowledge! And you have Medivh. Okay, I was on the wrong side. So then in that regard, he kind of becomes a bit of a Grima Wormtongue, a tragic figure, envious of other men, and ultimately just thrown away by those he trusted and he worked with to an extent, and only to stick the knife in Saruman's back. But I like the idea that he is both Saruman and in a way I guess you could say he is both Saruman and Tanis, half elven in a way. And I think that I really like Medivh making his way back because Khadgar redeemed at the last minute. But that Gul'dan plays a role in it because it is trauma that does end up changing men. Because I've seen it said that, I've heard it said that people cannot change, which is a really stupid idea. Of course they could. But I think it necessitates great moments in our lives to affect change. And trauma is a great moment in everyone's life. Trauma changes people. And I think that in the case of Medivh, being violated by Gul'dan in spirit like that was truly traumatic. That being said, the movie does have one other interpretation. Garona is Medivh's daughter. That's not up for question. She's his daughter in the movie. So what that opens it up to, now if you don't like the idea of her being Medivh's daughter, that's fine. I'm not sure how most of the fan base feels about that. I've not really been in touch with most of the fan base for a long time. I imagine they'll have things to say about this. But what I like about the movie is that she's unquestionably his daughter. And he does care for her. And what this means is that, now this just adds to the tragedy. And it also adds to a bit of humor. But it means that Medivh opened the portal for the most human of reasons. He wanted his family. He wanted his daughter. That his daughter had been used against him by Gul'dan. Gul'dan had kind of used her to force Medivh onto his side. But on the other hand, I do think that there, in a way, it means that he resented Khadgar for a lot of reasons, for being better than himself, for one thing, but it also shows an echo of Medivh's story with Khadgar. What I mean is Khadgar falls in love with Garona, just as Medivh fell in love with Garona's mother. But on the other hand, it means that Khadgar, it means Medivh is basically a terrible mother-in-law. I mean, father-in-law. I'm kidding. I had to say the mother-in-law joke. But truly, like, it means he's a terrible father-in-law because he's looking at his own, like, no, you're not worthy of my daughter, son. Gives a new meaning to that, like to Roxanne and Max Goof from Goofy movie. Would you rather that guy for a father-in-law, or would you rather Medivh?
I think I'd prefer him. As much as he looks intimidating,
his daughter has him well in hand. But ultimately, doesn't it mean that Medivh's lineage is cut down shortly after he is?
Yeah.
That is tragic. But here's the sad thing. What would have been his legacy if it wasn't her? One of the people he had a hand in raising, or possibly raising, who was supposed to be his heir. Essentially supposed to be his Obi-Wan. Khadgar was supposed to be his heir, but he cursed him. Wow. So his heir will probably be heirless.
That's sad.
He destroyed his own legacy. And in his possible envy and desire for his daughter, he destroyed his name. Because, like, his reputation was unquestionable before the war. But he destroyed his own reputation, his own legacy, in every meaning of the word. And I think I really like the idea of her being Medivh's daughter because it adds an extra layer of tragedy, but it also means that in a way he cut down his own legacy. But on the other hand, it shows how far gone he was when he was pushed too far. But it brings up the question, maybe he could have been talked down after cursing Khadgar, but Sargeras, kind of jockeyed in and went, no backing out now, Spucko, no backing down. But would he have backed down? I don't know. But on the other hand, it shows that Garona and Khadgar were able to reach him in his last moments. There's a lot to think about. That's the thing I love about Medivh. There's so much interpretation. Now, like I said, I like the idea that he's redeemed in his last moments, but I think it takes a great moment of trauma. With Gul'dan obviously being that trauma, because he's violating the spirit of Medivh. And I think it's at that moment that Medivh realizes. And there's also the forced possession by Sargeras. I think these two factors kind of have him going, okay, these guys were not my friends. But there's also the sheer empathy by Khadgar, despite the curse that I think Medivh... I like the idea that Medivh did lob the curse at him, spitefully and cruelly. But then Khadgar does the most important thing, redeems him. And then, this redemption is what is the best part. So imagine if they had actually had Khadgar cursed in the movie. And then had, that great scene where Khadgar just treats him with compassion and even love. How do you think... I don't think this movie would have been as badly rated. I think people would have looked at this movie with the pathos and said, wow, he still forgave him? I don't know if I could have. I'm going to be honest. I don't think I could have forgiven Medivh. I don't think I could have. But the fact that Khadgar did forgive is just wow.
Powerful.
And I think that's the sort of story our society does need. And I think that, all of our societies need that kind of beautiful story. And I think that Garona being there instead of Anduin Lothar would show how far Medivh has fallen. I mean, he's turned on his own daughter. It doesn't get worse than that. Yes, he's turning on his apprentice, but he's also turning on his actual biological blood. But then they redeem him. Doesn't get better than that. On the other hand, he's also redeemed by the fact that those supposed to be on his side are going into his mind and going, gimme, it's mine. Which, yeah. And yes, I am a fan of George Carlin, and I thought he was funny. But not that I agree with everything he ever said. There was a lot of things he said that was a little weird. I'm just saying. But on the other hand, he was funny. But his best jokes were in Dogma. Not my favorite movie, but he blessed his own golf club. Medivh's story is awesome. Early Warcraft. Oh, yes. Thank you, Rogue Dex. It is so awesome. And I like the idea of a lot of different room for interpretation. I thank Mark for correcting me on when I slipped up and forgot about the fact that he did try to reach Jaina. No, I'll admit my mistake. Yeah. But I think that he should have approached her first. So in that regard, that's up for interpretation with Medivh. But I like the idea that Medivh is fairly foolish and makes mistakes along the way. It means he's human. But I think the best part of redemption, of a possible redemption story, is I love the idea of Garona being his daughter. But it means that his actions directly led to her death. And I like the fact that he cursed. I like the idea that it was him who lobbed the curse rather than Sargeras at Khadgar. And Khadgar still forgave him and sought to reach out to him. I just think that this is the best possible interpretation of the story. But of course, I'm not going to inject this into every lore video. This is just my preference for the drama and the story, because we've got different versions of things. We've got World of Warcraft version, we've got Warcraft version, we've got the novel versions, we've got comic books. I'm just saying my favorite. Then again, from what little I've looked at, I kind of like, of all the guys trying to chase Garona, I kind of like Khadgar the best, because it adds pathos. It means that this is Medivh's family, essentially his son-in-law and his daughter, and yet he condemned them with his actions, because he's shortened Khadgar's life. massively. And because of his actions, he inadvertently massively shortens Garona's actions. And there's another thing. If you look at the Gul'dan-Garona relationship, this is a perversion of a father-daughter relationship. He enslaved the girl when he was supposed to help and take care of her. But then you have with Medivh and Khadgar. Now, she was raised, Garona, I mean, was not raised with love by Gul'dan. Khadgar was not raised with any love either within the Kirin Tor and when he's partially raised, I believe, by Medivh, unless I'm wrong. Now, naturally, there will be, hey, I've made a mistake already in the stream. I'll own it. But I think that he did have a hand in raising Khadgar. Did he raise him with any more love? In the movie, at least, there's no love. And a few comic books I looked at, it doesn't seem like there was any affection. And I looked at a few quotes from one of the books. There was little to no affection. So you have Garona and Khadgar who are raised very similarly and have very similar relationships with the arch magi of their respective worlds. And yet the relationships are so different. But because of Medivh's actions towards the two people he ought to have loved the most. And honestly, he didn't know his daughter. He did know Khadgar, but he had no love for Khadgar. But Medivh's story is awesome because there's so much pathos. And like I said, I like the daughter possibility because, you know what I mean? And I like the idea of Khadgar and Garona only because it is about Khadgar because, you know, he's the main character of Warcraft 1, one of them, not the only one. And you look at his story as a tragedy in a way, you know, like he's forced to slay his father figure. That's very edible. But then what happens to his girlfriend or his possible girlfriend? She's tortured to death after she's forced to slay, well, his king. If that's not pathos, I don't know what is. And, oh, do cabbages enjoy the frost like they enjoy the company of Brussels sprouts? Okay, Formal Goose Foundation from over on Twitch is asking the big questions. Okay, Dan, do cabbages enjoy the frost like they enjoy the company of Brussels sprouts? Go. These are the big questions.
Personally, I think you'd have to ask the tomatoes.
Oh, bring the tomatoes into this. Okay. That's a little too intellectual for my taste. But, yeah, like, what are your thoughts on my view? Like, maybe Khadgar Garona, if only for the Medivh angle and the tragedy surrounding him and Khadgar.
Medivh, in the end, with the entire matter of him essentially cursing both...
well, just cursing Khadgar.
Yeah, cursing Khadgar, I wouldn't be able to forgive him.
But on the other hand, I believe in some interpretations it's Sargeras who does it. So Medivh's not the one who does it. But I just like the interpretation that... I prefer the idea that he did do it. Would a potato talk garbage about a cabbage if the onions said something bad about strawberries? Okay, now I'm getting confused. Okay, Formal Goose Foundation, I think you're trolling a little. But if your argument is about whether the potatoes are the best, I think they are. Them and onions. But yeah, you were...
Maybe there's an aspect of both. Sargeras, in the end,
he's possessing Medivh, but when the curse is locked.
And
I just think that Medivh wanted to curse Khadgar.
Yeah.
But Sargeras kind of assists in the deed and like augments, well, basically helps him to do it. And does what Medivh would have been willing to do, but maybe Medivh didn't do to an extent. But does it diminish from the guilt, from the response, from the fact that Medivh is guilty of the act? No, that's what I think. But I prefer to read into it that Medivh is partially guilty as well. But,
yeah.
But, so that's what you're proposing. Okay.
That,
okay. So we're on the same page.
That the feelings Medivh had were always there. It's just Sargonis enhanced them.
Okay.
Fed into them.
I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to disagree. But I like the idea that it's Medivh who's like that. But I think that if Medivh could fall that far, it's even more cool how he could be redeemed through the power of love.
That's fair.
And compassion and pity. Because it's pity that, like, we make a big deal in Western civilization about how bad pity is, but pity is cousin to love. Like, without your ability to feel pity for someone, would you actually would you have any will to give them a hand when they're having a hard time in life?
Oh.
So that's my point. Let's see. Don't remember any love, just the usual. Master is awesome, but very eccentric too. What the hell, Master? Yeah, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Medivh was mind controlled by Sargeras. To an extent, I believe he was during the fight, like in both the movie and in the game. I believe he was pretty mind controlled, and during the fight, because on the wiki it says he was possessed. And we're kind of looking at various different sources when we do our videos, and we're both I'm very rusty on Warcraft lore, and Dan's, I think this is the first time diving. So we're basically researching as we go along and trying to learn. Like, that's the thing. Warcraft and Conan, we're learning as we're presenting to an extent. And if you think that makes us dumber, that's fine. Now, the channel is partially us wanting to learn more and kind of doing a bit of a series of research theses, I guess you could say. And we're debating. That's what the channel's for. It's because, well, it's also to present to you guys and entertain you guys, of course. But we are fantasy geeks, we are mythology geeks, but we're wanting to, I guess you could say, like, because Dan was a psychology student, because you went into psychology just for the fun of, you like behavioral and child psychology. You went in for that for the fun of it, and because you wanted to work with kids. I went into, I read some Campbell and Jung stuff because I was fascinated by that. But I liked history and literature. Well, I went into literature because I wanted to study comparative literature. My university didn't teach that. I went into history because I love history. It's the greatest action and adventure story ever told. Now, that's where we're trying to apply both our backgrounds to this literature we're reading. Because I would argue that modern fantasy is the heir to medieval literature. And Howard and Tolkien were writing more in the mode of medieval literature and classical literature. Modern fantasy is simply the current day version. And that if fantasy fiction is today's Norse sagas or fairy tales, and today's Arthuriana, we should, like, this might sound weird, but I don't see any way of being able to convince academia at universities and whatnot of the value of fantasy fiction. I remember being shunned by some for liking the fantasy stories I did like. Some professors didn't mind it, but some felt it foolish. Others didn't. But it was a matter of contention. But I find that looking at channels like Girl Next Gondor, World of Conan, and even Bellular Gaming, you can see that really smart. The average fantasy YouTuber or Tolkien tuber or Conan tuber are really smart. Typically smarter than us. Maybe I shouldn't insult Dan that way, but at least typically smarter than I am. And that's where I said, let's go into this. I want to debate with these people. They're doing the research studies I want to do. So that's what the nature of this channel is. So if we make mistakes along the way with Warcraft, it's because we're still learning. We are not masters of the lore, but we want to become masters of the lore. Like, we kind of want to master the lore in a way, but the only way to do that is to stumble and to study. I think he was both with Sargeras Taint, his mother. Yep, there was a battle between the two, and Mommy was tainted. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rogue Dex. He was infected somehow from birth. It's been a while. I never really played the game, but read novels and internet lore. Yeah, you're I've read some of the novels, not all. I think I've read like two of them.
That's two more than I did.
I read a bit of the WoW campaign guide. It was so well written. It was really well written. The lore was great in there. I got to pick that back up. I actually should find it again. I think I've got it somewhere, and I'll share it with you. I think it was in PDF form, but because a friend shared it with me, and I think it was Andrew. I can't remember. I just remember I got my mitts on it, and I was so fascinated by it. And then, of course, you got the wikis, which are awesome. The WoW wiki is so well written. Like, I love the Tolkien Gateway. It's probably my favorite, but the WoW wiki is right behind the Tolkien Gateway. It is so well put together. But yeah, you're very much right, Rogue Dex. You do have a tainted Medivh since birth. Well, since before birth. But I still like to believe, like, okay, that might give him a more, like, that might push him more towards darker side. But I'm still going to argue that he was still human and that he still had the freedom of choice. It's just, and I like the idea that he did father Garona, but what that means is that he, like, the pathway to hell is paved with the best of intentions. But it means that every step of the way was his own choice. And Sargeras enhanced the darker nature before he was even born. He always had kind of this push towards it, but Sargeras pushes him even further, and even possesses him, I think. And at least that's from what I read. And I really got to get my mitts on the original Dark Portal and original story, and we could just do a book club podcast of the actual events of Warcraft 1.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do that down the road. Now, I believe the people currently in the chat are more Warcraft fans, so if you guys want that, we'll have to do that. It's just we're currently bogged down under, what is it? How many book clubs? We have Dragons of Winter Night. We have Hour of the Dragon. We have Lord of the Rings we're going to be starting up. We have Silmarillion. We have Prydain. We have Solomon Kane. Yeah, I think that's it. That's so many.
Yeah.
We're going to have to finish the Solomon Kane story. Or I think you already did, but I need to catch up.
I haven't finished it yet.
Okay. We need to finish Prydain.
Indeed.
No, I think I just finished the Solomon Kane. We have to finish Prydain. We have to finish Winter Night. But maybe after Winter Night, Winter Night, we have to do Spring Dawning. But maybe after we do, like, I know I want to do Warcraft in a few months, because I want to do a Warcraft book club at some point. But the thing is, I'd want us to do it at the first Wars era, because, maybe we'll just go into the comic books. Maybe the comic books, there are comic books this era, and we could just follow that. But anyways, yeah, the thing about Medivh is, it's interesting that we just wanted to just do a quick summary of everything, and now we're just getting into we're deep diving Medivh, him and Khadgar. But I think Khadgar, like, the thing with Medivh is that him and Khadgar are so inextricably linked, and you've got Khadgar, who walks away from the Medivh battle probably happy in the knowledge that he redeemed his mentor. And I like the idea that he did redeem him. This gives him at least one victory. But then you have, like I said, I like the darker interpretation of Medivh, but I also like the idea that he got redeemed. But Khadgar, what is he left with? Garona slew Lane. Anduin Lothar had to come in and rescue the children. And Garona was tortured to death by Ogrim Doomhammer.
He essentially walked away with nothing.
And he walked away aged beyond comparison. So now he's only got a few years left to his life.
And personally, I think that was probably the most evil action that happened. Khadgar was young.
He had his whole life ahead of him.
And it was stolen just out of pettiness.
Petty spite. Yeah. But the fact that he still could show compassion and pity and redeem the man who did that and save him from Sargeras, that's noble. There's something kind of saintly about Khadgar in personality. Yeah. And I don't know, I really like Khadgar. He seems like just the nicest guy on earth. Or Azeroth, I should say. But yeah, he suffers. And yet, does he even stop doing the right thing? Does he go off and mope? No, he just keeps fighting. He just keeps fighting for the Alliance and but he also tries to do the right thing for the Horde. Like it doesn't seem like he held what Doomhammer did too personally on some level. Like, he keeps trying to do the right thing. And this just, like I said, I just think it adds to Khadgar. But yeah, the early wars is very interesting. And oh man, it's such a great era. Later he joined the expedition for the Second Dark Portal with Turalian. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. That maybe Medivh should have opened up a portal to bring him back in Warcraft 3, but maybe that was beyond Medivh's power, because maybe he has no power, and he's except the odd shapeshifting ability. And like we got on Medivh's case earlier, but now he should have approached Jaina first. But I still stand by it to an extent. But on the other hand, I think that's also doing an injustice to an extent to Medivh. One has to bear in mind he is only human, and he's a very foolish one. And
Indeed.
I say he's very foolish, but this adds to the tragedy and drama, and it just makes him an even better character. In hindsight, I didn't think we'd spend an hour talking about Medivh. Yeah. Doomhammer is still my favorite. Khadgar's probably my favorite Alliance character.
I do like Khadgar myself.
Okay, is he your favorite Warcraft character overall?
Yeah.
All right. Warcraft has many great characters. Yeah, it does. You've got great characters like Varian. You've got great characters like Medivh, Khadgar, Doomhammer, Arthas, Asmongold, Lane. You've got a lot of them, and they're all great. Okay, how about favorite Horde character?
Oh boy. Honestly, I've always been partial to the Alliance.
Oh, that's fair. If you haven't given the Horde too much thought, that's all okay.
Yeah.
I'd argue they don't have as most of the best characters are with the Alliance, especially in the early era, and that's for a reason. But I think the Horde primarily had Doomhammer. Early days. I'm not talking later days like World of Warcraft. No. World of Warcraft has a lot of great Horde characters, but I just think the early era, it's only Doomhammer. And Doomhammer just rocks it. But yeah, for Medivh, in hindsight, I might have to rank him as one of the greatest and most well-written fantasy mages of all times. If we were able to discuss him for so long when we were not planning to, we start off kind of bashing him, then we deep dive deeper into the character, and we go, or at least I start off bashing him a little, but criticizing his choice just for who to approach first. But once you scratch a bit closer beneath the surface, and you look at all the different interpretations, you go, this character is a really, really good character. I don't know how the fan base is going to feel about me kind of going, I prefer Garona being his daughter. It just adds. I believe they retconned that out, didn't they?
Who knows?
I can't remember. I've been out of the loop for so long with Warcraft. And wow, it's just we decided to bring in Warcraft because didn't we do a poll or something? We had asked some people and they said, yeah, look into it. And we said, okay. And then we started studying it and we went, this is actually a pretty interesting universe. I only moved away because around the time of Deathwing, I forget what that expansion's called. I just found it utterly just point. I think it's Cataclysm. I just didn't see the point in it. I didn't like it. That said, if you love it, love what you love. And then I just dropped out of the loop. And even then I wasn't super knowledgeable of all the lore. Our oldest brother knew a lot more. And he was always a big Warcraft fan. I was more into StarCraft. And then deep diving more and more into Warcraft for this channel is just, wow, there's so much. There's so much. I'm only glad the fan base has been patient with us and tolerant of us noobs deep diving into their lore. Oops. But with that said, I think we're at the end of our stream. I'm getting really hungry and I'm feeling fairly hypoglycemic. And I'm actually going to just also share this stream on Twitter because that's something I forgot to do right before it. And yeah, I'm just glad people showed up for this one. And yeah, so we've kind of covered all the points up to Chronicles, where we're at in the Chronicles of the First Wars. So now that we've reached this point, I wonder. Now I'm just pitching to the chat real quick before we end. We discussed it in the video, but we're going to repeat. I'm thinking we can maybe do character videos. And Medieval, we might not. I might just clip part of the stream. I'll keep the stream up, don't worry. And just clip part of it and just post it as a video. Maybe I'll do that. Or maybe we'll just, you know what, maybe it'd be better to just study Medieval in greater detail and then come back and do a video.
Yeah.
A separate video. Clipping just part of the stream doesn't seem very respectful.
That way we'll get to look deeper and get more awareness of the actual lore.
Fair enough. Very good point. We're definitely going to have to do... We'll probably have to start with Medieval and Gul'dan because they're the real ones who caused a war. And then go from there to the kings. Then I also really want to delve into Doomhammer at some point because I love him as a character. So yeah, hope the chat doesn't mind that we're pitching the idea of character videos. We might put it in the same playlist. I'm nervous about that because I don't want to, like, I understand, like, for cinematic value, people would prefer, like, you know, you have all the historical events and characters maybe separate, or would they prefer, like, the same playlist? Because, you know, like, then you get deeper character dives and as the historic events are progressing. I don't know which one people would prefer. And I only ask because, well, this is the thing about every business, every YouTube channel is that it's a service in a way. And we do have to bear in mind those we're providing a service to. And we're kind of throwing our academic research videos onto and whatnot. So, yeah, we'll probably pitch it to you in a form of a poll if you want later for character videos. And we will, maybe we'll premiere those. Yeah. But, yeah, we'll do that. And we'll probably pause some of the event videos, like we will continue with Chronicles of the First Age. It's just that those videos take time to edit, lots of time, because they typically end up, 30 to 40 minutes, and then we have to clip and you put together the last few, which those took hours to put together, right? So we're going to record the next history video of history of the Chronicles of the First Wars, and we are then going. But when we go to record that, we're going to record some of the character, at least one character video. We could quickly post up the next character video, and then while we work on this what happens next after Anduin Lothar saves the royal children and flees to Lordaeron and whatnot, and what happens next in the wars, which that way, like, we're working on that while we're working on character stuff. I know we should, like, people would probably prefer us to delve at some point into WoW, but I don't want to touch WoW until we're clear this era.
Yeah, because WoW.
The only thing is, I might post as a short just my joke I cracked earlier about the great characters of Warcraft. Kudos to anyone who caught it. Anyways, well, actually, it feels right to leave Mr. Henrik Leinblad's comment here as we end the stream. So don't forget to share the stream. We'd greatly appreciate that. As the channel grows, we're able to. Well, it's encouraging because the greatest flattery is people commenting, liking, and subscribing. And the more this channel grows, the more we can spend time on this channel, because means there's more of a reason to. Anyways, but yeah, smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were, I guess, Gadgar taking down 3 and 1. But do take care, everyone, and have yourselves a fantastic day.